The village of Wexford lay nestled between rolling hills and thick patches of woodland. Its stone cottages and thatched roofs clustered tightly together as if for protection. On most days, smoke curled lazily from the chimneys, the air filled with the scent of peat fires, and the fields surrounding the settlement thrummed with the sound of animals and the rhythm of peasant labor. But lately, the air hung heavier, charged with something unspoken. The villagers walked with their eyes lowered and their conversations hushed. It was as though the very soil beneath their feet had soured, and every man, woman, and child could feel it. That summer the crops began to fail. Barley stalks, once strong and golden, turned thin and brittle. Wheat, which had promised to yield a rich harvest, withered in the fields before it could ripen. Farmers shook their heads and muttered about foul weather. But the skies remained bright and blue. Soon after, a rash of deaths struck livestock. Goats, cows, and pigs that had been healthy, one evening were found stiff and lifeless the next morning. The village herdsman swore he saw strange shadows moving at the edge of the fields at night, though when pressed he could not describe them. At first the people spoke of bad luck, the hand of God testing their faith, or the creeping touch of disease. But when a group of children fell ill with a fever that no prayers nor herbal remedies could ease, their suffering gave birth to a darker thought. Whispers began to stir among the villagers, whispers of witchcraft. In such a small community, everyone knew everyone else's business, and in times of hardship, suspicion naturally clung to those who lived on the margins. The first name to pass between lips was Eleanor of Wexford, the widow who lived at the edge of the forest. She had been married to a woodcutter, long since buried, and had no children of her own. Eleanor made her living selling herbs, teas, and tinctures. Her knowledge of roots and flowers was undeniable. She had healed cuts, treated fevers, and aided childbirth. But the same knowledge that once brought comfort now became a mark of danger. How could one woman know so much unless she was favored by darker powers? Another name soon followed, Marjorie Holt, the village midwife. Though her hands had delivered dozens of children, saving as many mothers as she could, her remedies often involved strange chants and rituals she claimed were handed down from her grandmother. When misfortune began to plague the village, even her friends exchanged uneasy glances at the sight of her bent figure moving silently through the lanes. It was not long before gossip grew teeth. A farmer claimed to have seen Eleanor wandering the fields at night, her hands raised to the sky as if in prayer. Another swore Marjorie had cursed him under her breath when he refused to pay her fee in full, and days later his cow fell dead. None of these tales were proven, yet each retelling sharpened them until they were as sharp as a blade. The village tavern became the true courtroom, its benches and tables buzzing with rumor. By the flickering light of tallow candles, men muttered into their cups of ale, their voices thick with fear. "The devil walks among us," one said, pounding the table with a heavy hand, "and he wears the faces of women we have trusted." Others nodded, though some sat silent, unwilling to voice doubt lest suspicion fall upon them. Children, ever perceptive to adult fear, began to play cruel games. They whispered "witch" as Eleanor passed by, throwing pebbles at her cottage door. Marjorie found marks drawn in chalk upon her doorstep, strange symbols meant to ward off evil. What had once been simple eccentricities, an old woman's laugh, an odd turn of phrase, a solitary walk, became proof of consorting with the devil. Yet not all were convinced. Bartholomew Crane, the magistrate of Wexford, remained cautious. A man of education, he had seen villages destroy themselves over baseless fears before, but he also understood the power of hysteria. Once it gripped the hearts of common folk, reason became as fragile as a spider's web. He watched quietly as tension thickened like storm clouds, knowing it would only take one spark to set the village ablaze. The spark came on a warm evening in July. The Blackwood family, farmers who lived on the outskirts, awoke to find 3 of their goats dead. Their throats bore no wounds, their bodies no signs of struggle, only stiff limbs and blank eyes. William Carter, their neighbor, claimed he had seen Agnes Blackwood, the youngest daughter, wandering near his fields under the moonlight. She had been muttering, he insisted, and the air around her had seemed heavy and strange. Agnes was only 16, quiet and often dreamy, but in the minds of frightened villagers, innocence meant little. Her mother, Thomasin Reed, tried desperately to shield her, insisting Agnes was merely fetching water, but the damage was done. The whispers grew louder, sharper. It was no longer enough to gossip in secret corners. The village demanded answers. That night, as dusk settled over Wexford, The church bells tolled, summoning the people. Within the cold stone walls, the villagers gathered, their faces pale in the candlelight. At the front stood Father Thomas Gray, tall and austere, his black robes hanging heavy upon his frame. His voice echoed like thunder as he spoke. "My children, we are beset by evil. The devil seeks to claim this village, and he works through those among us who serve him. Our crops wither, our beasts perish, our children sicken, and still you ask for proof. The proof is before your very eyes. Do you not see it?" He swept his gaze across the congregation, pausing long enough on Eleanor and Marjorie to make his meaning clear. Eleanor's lips tightened, though she said nothing. Marjorie lowered her eyes to the floor. Agnes sat trembling beside her mother, the subject of hushed, pointing fingers. Father Thomas raised his hands. "We must be vigilant. We must root out this evil before it consumes us all. To spare the guilty is to condemn the innocent. Better that we suffer now than that we lose our very souls." The crowd murmured in agreement, fear and fervor feeding off one another. Some crossed themselves, others clutched rosaries, but all felt the weight of the priest's words. A line had been crossed. What had begun as whispers was now a declaration. The village believed. Witches walked among them. When the meeting ended, the villagers spilled into the night, their torches flickering like restless spirits. The air was thick with unease. Eleanor returned to her cottage to find a dead crow nailed to her door, its wings outstretched in mockery. Marjorie sat awake until dawn, listening to the howls of wolves in the distance and wondering if she would soon hear the sound of men at her door. And in the quiet of the monastery, Brother Abel, the young monk tasked with keeping records, dipped his quill into ink and wrote down the day's events. He did not know why, only that some instinct told him these whispers were the beginning of something terrible. Thus the stage was set. Misfortune had birthed suspicion, and suspicion had grown into accusation. The village of Wexford stood at the edge of a precipice, ready to tumble into darkness. The witch trials had not yet begun, but the first seeds had been sown, and soon fear would demand its harvest.